Today we are interviewing Billie Jo Kaufman, who is Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Library and Information Resources at American University in Washington, D.C. Billie Jo, I believe those watching or reading this interview would like to know a little bit about you personally. For example, could you begin by telling us about where you were raised and about your family, both when you were young and today? Then perhaps could you tell us about your education, including where you went to college, library school, and later to law school?
Be delighted. I grew up and was raised in southern Indiana. I always say right across from Louisville, Kentucky. I have one sister. I'm the baby of the family. So my parents owned for more than 50 years a realtor and insurance office in Jeffersonville, Indiana. And they were both only children, so we really had a pretty small family, but there were advantages to that at times. Their office was only one block from the public library, which I think may have a great deal to do with where I really ended up. I would go to the library after school, after kindergarten, on Saturdays. They often had Sunday appointments. So I spent a lot of time at the public library. It was an old Carnegie, kind of typical Indiana library. I still fondly remember it and my stops on the way. I really, interestingly, actually checked out books to the neighborhood children, but I had to have real library cards and day-due stamps, just like the library had. So I was doing that at about age 8. So I've been doing this work a long, long time. I went to undergraduate school at Indiana University at Bloomington. Most and many of my high school friends ended up at IU. It was $325 a semester, and it was a great Big Ten university, and so it all made perfect sense. I majored, interestingly, in education. I had thought I would be a teacher. I'm not sure I knew how to be a librarian at the time. But interestingly, Indiana University had a degree in kind of secondary school, and one of the minors you could get was in library science through what is now their School of Information Services. And so I got a minor as an undergraduate student with 24 hours of graduate school library science courses. That proved to be interesting later, because then it made it very difficult to get a master's in library science because I'd already had all the courses. But I student taught at the Indiana University Laboratory School in Bloomington. I always had great mentors. Marion Armstrong, who is one of the leaders from Indiana University, was my supervising instructor, and people like Harold White and Herb White, I think, and names that we read about in articles were all really early pioneers at Indiana University. And they also had sort of an AV degree that you could get there early on. And so I took a lot of courses in transparencies and things that I guess would have been technology maybe in 1970s. My first real professional library position was at Indianapolis-Marion County Public Library, and I was a branch children's librarian at one of the suburb branches of Indianapolis. That was interesting because I worked there for about 60 days, and I got a call from a school corporation that had a middle school, senior high school joint librarian position that had just come open. And I'd read all those articles about how you can't leave a job after only 60 days. But I went to the personnel director, and he said, why would you stay working here for less money, and you're going to work shorter, only 9 months, and more money. And I thought, well, he's, I think, encouraging me. So I did that position, and while I was at that position, it was a tenuous time because middle schools had been taken over a little bit by drugs. Kids were smelling shellac, and sort of odd things were going in the library. But my principal was very pleased because I had lost the least number of books than any of my predecessors. So we thought that was a good sign. Ultimately, I left the school librarian positions and ended up as a public librarian, as a library director in a suburb of Indianapolis as well. That was very interesting because you have to hire people and do contracts and all kinds of things as a public library director. And so it was about at that time, I had maybe always wanted to go to law school, but it just never worked out. They were only accepting 5 or 7 women at Indiana, and it just wasn't in the cards. But my father-in-law passed away, and we had the opportunity to do some things that we hadn't done. And my husband took a job in Fort Lauderdale. I applied to only one law school, Nova Southeastern, and on my law school application I put that I wanted to be a law librarian, and I don't think they got very many applications that said that. And interestingly enough, the director of admissions at Nova was Michael Richmond, who had worked for Roy Mirsky at Texas when his wife was teaching tax there, and who is the 8th edition or 9th edition author of Tax Legal Research. And Michael had been a librarian for Mr. Mirsky, and he must have seen that on my application, so he called me right away and said, yes, you know, there's absolutely a place here. So we ended up in Fort Lauderdale, and it was maybe the best decision I ever made. I sent a resume, I guess you would say, to the library and said I was going to be a student, and I didn't think I could work because I knew there was something about some kind of 10-hour work rule or something with ABA. But I got a call, and they said they could hire me for $4.50 an hour, and I could loosely file. And so that's how it really all started. More importantly than that, I was working for Carol Rohrenbeck, who was a wonderful mentor to me. Roy Mirsky was the consultant for Nova because it was a very young law school. I met him early on in my career because he had been the appraiser hired to do the Finley-Cumble bankruptcy appraisal for their libraries, and so I had helped him do the Florida materials at their office in Fort Lauderdale. The great thing about being at Nova was I was taking courses. I took all the required courses, but because I had this idea that I would be a law librarian, I took a lot of seminar classes because I wanted to do the research and that piece. So interestingly, one day Carol came by, and she was pacing because she had lost her serials and acquisitions librarian. And I laughed and said, well, you could hire me, really joking because I thought I couldn't work full time. And in 2 hours' time, she went to the dean's office. I don't know what they did, but she made me an offer. There you go. I was a serials and acquisitions librarian. So that's sort of how that all started. My family, those that are remaining, my parents passed away a number of years ago now. Most still live in southern Indiana. I have a nephew who is a obstetrics and gynecologist, and another nephew who is a practice manager for a big pediatrics firm. My sister and brother-in-law are still there, so I still get back, and I still get to Bloomington on occasion, and so I guess still a little Midwestern left in me, but that's sort of how it all got started.
Well, that sounds very interesting and very wonderful. So you have not been totally co-opted by the city of Washington, D.C.
Not totally, not
Very
almost.
Good. Very good. I think that gives a good balance. You have an interesting background in that you came eventually into law librarianship by way of public libraries, and which I think is unusual for many people in the roles we played. And sort of for purposes of disclosure, you and I do have something in common in that I was your predecessor here at American University in the law library as director. However, not only did you succeed me, but you have also taken on an additional role, which I didn't, and that was, in your almost decade here now, you have responsibility not just for the library management, but also for the management of the information division of the law school. And I wonder if perhaps you could comment a little bit about that and the combination of aspects, because I know in law schools, even when I was still active, and certainly since, this combination of responsibilities seemed to work very well and has become quite commonplace.
I remember when I read the job description for American University, I thought, oh, this will be great. I won't be responsible for technology, because at Nova, we were the first law school, wired law school in the country. And the good thing about that was we were first. The bad thing about that is we often were on the bleeding edge. I negotiated contracts with Dell for $1 million. There were things that went really well, and there were things that were really scary. So when I came here, I thought, well, this will be wonderful. I'll be a library director, and there's lots of great things to do and great faculty, and we'll do some great services. And it wasn't too long that I got a call from Associate Dean Pike one day and said, we know you have this background, could you come to a meeting? And so we did some committee oversight, we looked at things, and somehow on a very good day or bad day, I said, I can do this will be fine. Now, in all fairness and honesty, we immediately looked for a really good and well-qualified director of technology, because it's one thing to have oversight, it's quite another thing to do the 24/7 day-to-day operations. So we have a quite large staff. They provide media services and backup to faculty. We do a number of other, we were, I think, one of the very first schools that did podcasting. We host the Inter-American Moot Court competition, and we have translation booths, and some pretty high-end technology, and we like doing that, but it takes a really well-qualified staff. So I get sometimes the accolades, but have a lot of people that are putting all of that work together. I think it's been important for the library because we're not second place. I can usually take care of the library and make sure that we have the right hardware and software and things that we need, and usually that means things that the students need. So there's a good piece that's helpful about kind of being able to be always at the table for technology. You mentioned the public library background, and it's interesting because as libraries have moved a little bit away from being warehouses of books and collection development organizations, the service concept is really taken hold. And of course, public libraries are all about service to the young, the old groups, and so that kind of service background and kind of high-touch background to your users, I think was a really good background for me to have coming into academia particularly. We have many alums, 3 LLM programs, an SJD program, over 100 student organizations, 10 clinics, and everyone has kind of a special library need. And so it's fun having all of those customers, I guess. But it's fun doing the technology on most days. Technology is one of those things, when it works, you don't hear a thing about it. and when it doesn't work, it's never a good day. But we've done some good things. We're pretty well resourced, and I think the exciting thing going to the new building is kind of all the changes in technology and iPads and the smartphones and some of the new challenges and services that we'll be able to operate because of the technology.
Well, that all sounds very interesting, and I remember from my own experience all the beginnings of the, the digital era, and it sounds like things continue. And from what I have read, the so-called experts in the field, with the increasing capacity of these systems, have said that we have not seen anything compared to what is coming.
I think that's right. We just, I was on the committee for Bricks and Bytes this last year at American Bar Association's conference, and we have a gentleman coming Tuesday to speak to the faculty, Mark Valente from Sexton Group. And I think his presentation may scare them to death because it's just, more mobile devices, more ways to use technology in the classroom. And so I'll report back on that presentation. But I think they're going to be excited about what they see that's coming soon. And that's the scary thing. It doesn't take very long to make those big leaps. So.
I think you have now alluded to what I want to ask next, and that is with your Bricks and Bytes involvement. You have been involved in sort of greater or outside of the law school and community, more of a professional community in other things. For example, you've served on the editorial board for the Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction for almost 15 years now, and you are also chair of the American Bar Association's Committee on Libraries. Would you like to tell us a little bit about some of your various professional activities, both perhaps outside of the school and maybe perhaps here in the school? I know you've gotten the short straw on the space committee, the building committee. Is that a way of putting you're the chair?
I am the chair.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just you're either awfully lucky or you're just in the right place at the right time. But when I was at Nova, my dean, Joseph Harbaugh, who's a former faculty member here at AU.
Oh, I remember Joe.
He was, of course, a good friend to Professor Elliott Milstein when Professor Milstein was the president of Association of American Law Schools. And, of course, Professor Milstein needed candidates for various committees that he was filling, so he appointed me to the AALS Committee on Libraries, and I did that. And of course, you just always meet a lot of wonderful people. I was very active in Cali and its editorial board, mostly out of the work at Nova, because we were doing a lot of wired and wireless things. We had this mandatory laptop requirement. We were one of the first law schools that did a number of distance ed programs. And so Cali was sort of right up my alley. I wasn't really a techie, but I enjoyed the work that I did and worked with Deb Quintwell and John Mayer on some of their early authoring software. And they realized that they had great Cali lessons, but just like any casebook or any other publication, they had to be updated. And so this editorial board work was really interesting. My American Bar Association work has just always been fun. There's great people that you meet, Scott Pago, Penny, Rita Rausch, the list is long. I was fortunate or unfortunate to be the chair during the standards conversations about status, and that continues on, maybe will continue on for a while. But the best part, I've really had the opportunity to do, I think, nearly 20 ABA or AALS site visits, and to go out and meet people and see that the standards really work and accreditation really works. Every law school, if you're ranked number 1 or if you're 200, is really making great efforts to offer good legal education. And you see that people do it differently. People have different models. People have different libraries. People have different hours. They have different staff capabilities and resources. But everyone does a terrific job, and so having that opportunity has given me a whole different feeling about rankings, and you know, I know they sell magazines, but I really believe that there's very, very good things that the bottom tier does that the top tier couldn't touch, and maybe we all don't want to be like Harvard. So that work and the people that you meet and the long-term relationships and friends is really important. It's so important that when I actually came here, the dean said, well, is there anything particular you care about? And I said, the only thing I really care about is I really want the professional development budget well funded. I have library faculty. They have tenure requirements and scholarship requirements just like the faculty. They have important conferences and memberships that they need to participate in. And so far, that's all been very well funded, and we've been quite fortunate. Susan Lewis is serving on the executive board. We've had people that have served as officers or editors at LSDC and for their publications. And I think some of it is having the capability that the staff's travel is funded, their registrations are funded, and they can participate and are encouraged to participate at pretty high levels. I think that's good for the library, but I think it's good for American University. They see their names. We have a little bit different provost than maybe when you were here, who really has elevated the standard of excellence, and so we've tried to create an environment of scholarship for the library faculty, a little bit like the law faculty, in so much as having brown bag lunches and having a way for them to share their scholarship. There's not much avenue or an environment to do that. And my husband and I recently, working with the development office, sponsored a scholarship for an award each year just for library faculty, because the faculty have that award, and we really want to create that environment for them too. So the first winner was Seema Merkin, and she had co-authored a publication with Mike Pettit, who is actually who sent me the email to apply for this position. So we wanted to remember him in that piece as well. But you know, they work really hard, and the whole scholarship piece for them is kind of in addition to their day job. And so, you know, having that funding and being involved in those professional activities, it's fun. Some of it becomes hard work. I was once named to the AALS membership review board, and Bob Dinnerstein, one of our faculty, said, did anybody tell you how much work there is? And I said, well, I know you were on it, and that committee is a lot of work. So when my 3-year stint was up for that, I was pretty happy, but still learned a lot. So
it's interesting, even though this was not something that we talked about earlier in preparation, I'd like to take the chance of asking you a bit about what it's like to serve as a director when your subordinates as librarians are your colleagues as faculty members. That is not common,
no.
But at American U, it was throughout my 30 years here, and certainly your years here. Do you have any thoughts about that? I understand already that you work well with it because you've done things to help bring them to the next level, and that's wonderful. Do you have any other thoughts or you'd like to share?
I think it's interesting. I mean, there's times that the process, I sometimes feel like a dean of a law school, because you have issues that come up that you really can't resolve for that. Maybe that's a good thing. You have to kind of work through those issues. Even the change in provost and those kinds of things, faculty manuals and the time it takes to do that work. You think, you know, that wasn't on our things to do list this year. And realizing even the work of taking and the mentoring of of a colleague through that process is a little bit different than just a career development through law librarianship or librarianship, I guess, of any nature. So it was a little bit for me to get used to, and I think there's days that I think, oh, we could move faster. We missed a really good candidate to Georgetown once because we just had the search process and all that went with it, and my colleague Bob Oakley was able to hire Amy on the spot, and I thought, oh, this is sad. But I always laugh until I say I stalked her for 2 years through Georgetown and Duke, and I have lured her back. So maybe it all works out. But I remembered that time. I thought, oh, I could have just done this. And so you just prepare. And now we prepare a little bit when we know something's going to come on the spot. We sort of build things into the calendar a little bit differently. And there's some interesting things, even at the university level, we're not getting, we've only, I think, have one additional library faculty position since your tenure. We have a school of 1,700 students, 3 LLMs, an SJD, and we have the same number of librarians, and it's getting pretty tough. A zillion grant programs. But the university libraries moved some positions to sort of off the tenure track. The library faculty and I are a little concerned about how you live in that world. We realize that the law faculty have somewhat done it with practitioners and residents in the clinic and some long-term contracts and legal rhetoric. But we're a very small shop of 10 people, and so to create sort of a funny different status, I think we're leery about it. We may have no choice if we can't get additional tenure lines approved. We might have to look at some models. We've looked at a model of maybe some kind of off of the clinic practitioner models of maybe a library fellow where we are building future librarians for other future positions. But it's hard. It's we're just not sure. We sort of like the model that we have, and we'd like to have more of those lines. But we know that one of these days, if we continue to grow and the work continues as it is, we may have to just bite the bullet and figure out what might be another alternative. But we don't like that kind of double class of people, and we keep thinking, well, maybe it's just a sabbatical, maybe that's the only real difference. But I'm not sure that's true, because I think we have status and we're looked upon different in the community because of it. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than just a sabbatical opportunity.
Well, thank you, Billie Jo Kaufman, for allowing us to visit with you today, and for taking these few minutes to share much about yourself and our profession. Before closing, however, is there anything else that you would like to mention or comment about before we conclude?
I maybe should say one thing about the space or the building committee. It is an exciting time here at the law school. We will have, maybe for the first time ever, a law school campus designed to be an educational space for all of our classrooms, programs, and we have a great committee and working very closely with the university. So that's really fun. But I think in this time of economic and questioning about legal education, this exercise or filming that you're doing is going to really create some information and models for some law students that have those JDs, but maybe could get an MLS, really could find law librarianship as a wonderful career. Many of them that we've used as part-time reference librarians, have gone on to library school. We have 3 staff right now that have finished their library school requirements, and so I think this will be great to give the community that's out there thinking about the career some models of how people have done it and done it a little bit differently. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for both being such a fine successor to me here at the university. At least from everything I can glean, I was an act to follow, I won't say what kind. You did it right.
Oh, thank you.
And you have moved the library, I think, in a lot of the right directions. I know this is a little bit probably inappropriate for me to say, but I'm delighted.
Oh, thank you.
I've looked around.
Except Walter still takes my space, but.
Well, that's an occupational hazard. But,
That's right.
But the new building plans sound absolutely fabulous. I mean, we looked 20-some years ago when we got the building you're presently in at the campus site, which is actually near one of the subway stations. And we weren't able to do it that time, but it sounds like now you're going to do it and you're going to do it right. And I think your involvement in the process is extremely helpful, and that the library, again, is at the table. I always conducted things the same way. I always got myself involved in this sort of thing if it was to be involved in, so I do appreciate that. Well, thank you again, Billie Jo.
Thank you.
We will now conclude the interview.
Perfect.